I'm Jenn Cockrell, Senior Product Marketing Manager for the Graph, and Jeremy?
I'm Jeremy Thake. I'm the Principal Product Manager Lead on Microsoft Graph, and we're here today to talk about news from around the Graph.
All right, we did hands up just a minute ago, but we were asking how many of you guys are currently using Microsoft Graph, or you're here to maybe do some learning, already using? Okay, awesome.
Some hands.
Here for some learning.
There's some thumbs up online too, look at that, that's great.
Okay, cool, awesome, well you're in the right spot. To get us started, Jeremy already kind of alluded, but this is a discussion and a Q&A, so definitely come with your questions. We do have some topics, but feel free to raise your hand. If you are online, go ahead and pop it in the chat. I will go ahead and be monitoring that so we can get your questions answered as well.
And then if you do have a question online in the chat, if you can type the question out and send it, and Jen's going to triage that and make sure that we have a good balance of people getting questions answered in the room, and also from online in the Magical Cloud as well. So yeah, Jen, do you want to just start off just to kind of frame the room on what Microsoft Graph is, and we'll go from there?
Absolutely. So I think some of us have seen this graphic before. It's got a lot of words on it. But let's go ahead, and before we dive into Microsoft Graph, let's ground our conversation around the Microsoft 365 platform. And if you joined the keynote earlier today, you heard some awesome discussion around a platform. And so the Microsoft 365 platform is really a platform for developers to build people-centric productivity experiences and increase the effectiveness and engagement of your apps. And so the foundation of the Microsoft 365 platform is Microsoft Identity. And this is where we have identity across work and life for each user and organization. And so for developers like you guys, it offers standard basic auth libraries, seamless sign up, sign in, seamless sign in, sign up model to access data in Microsoft 365. Cool. So now let's talk about the graph and the Microsoft Graph. And it's that gateway to customer data within Microsoft 365. It provides the core schema for many of the important productivity data types. And you would be interacting with Microsoft Graph in 3 different ways. And that's the REST API, Microsoft Graph Data Connect, and connectors. So this is going to be kind of our grounding in Microsoft Graph.
So, without further ado, I saw some hands up over here earlier, people eager to ask questions. So we have a runner in the other Jeremy Kelley, who's on the Microsoft Graph team as well. He moved into our core team. He was actually in the SharePoint product group, shipping a lot of the APIs there, so knows his stuff too. So who had their hands up here would like to ask the first question? There we go, right at the back there. Thank you, Jeremy. And yes, it has got confusing in meetings when there's 2 Jeremys. I'm sure other people are familiar with that.
Sorry. So I was looking for the specific error on my laptop, but I have a Microsoft Graph app that syncs events from our SQL database and creates Outlook events from that data. And occasionally when posting events or deleting events, I get an invalid input received error, and I don't know exactly why. And I've seen a couple of people have had the same issue on GitHub.
Interesting. How are you calling the API and the Graph? Are you using your own HTTP request, or are you using?
I'm using the client library.
Yeah, so you're using our SDKs. That's good. So the errors that you're getting there, if they're intermittent like that, typically the way we would handle that is to file a support ticket so we can see in your specific tenant why that's happening. Those errors aren't as generic, so it's hard without like seeing how frequently you're calling that on what that error may be. And so I can work you offline to take that particular question from a troubleshooting perspective, because it might be something in your tenant that's causing that to happen that frequently. It's just super hard to troubleshoot that without having more information.
Okay.
I do appreciate the question, though. Thank you. Okay, who else in the room had their hand up? Is that working out?
So we're looking through the documentation. There's some conflicting information on how long a subscription can live in terms of how far in the future you can give an expiration date.
Yeah.
From using it, it seems like that's an hour. That seems very short. So kind of the 2-part question is that truly as far in the future as you can make a subscription, or can it be longer? And the second part of that question is, how do you then create a long-living subscription that could last weeks, months, indefinitely?
Yeah, good question. So from a subscription perspective, so that people understand, this is around change notifications and webhooks. And so the idea is that there are various resources on the graph that allow you to be notified when changes happen or events, objects are created on, say, your calendar or someone's email, having an email dropped in an inbox. And to do that, you have to register for a subscription to get those notifications come to your own API call. Each what we call service on the graph, whether it be Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, the identity, Azure AD objects, call backend services that have their own models for how they handle those change notifications, those webhooks. And each one of those has different limits or limitations around how long the subscription lifetimes are for each one. So with Calendar, and I'm pulling from my head here, I'm pretty sure it's, I'm going to say 3 days. Thank you, Ina. She's at the front confirming it for me. And it's 3 days. So if you're seeing an hour on event calendars, then I'd probably want to look at your code to see how you're doing the dates to make that happen. I can see you shaking your head. But typically it's 3 days. There are other services that are shorter than that. There are other services that are longer than that. So identity for the Azure AD objects actually have a longer lifespan of their subscriptions. But for Exchange, it should be 3 days. And Jeremy's got his hand up as well.
SharePoint, I believe, is 30 days. So
yeah.
We have significantly longer on files and drives.
But if you're only, so if you're only seeing on certain, is this on Teams messages you're specifically asking for? So we actually have some people in the call. I can see Raghu, and I can see, who else can I see on here? I can see Raghu is on the call. Raghu, are you able to confirm what the subscription lifetime is for the Teams subscriptions to chat change notifications?
That's right. Yeah, Teams has a 1 hour limitation right now. We are going to enable. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Okay, so it's an hour for Teams, so that is confirmed. So there is a subscription page you can go to and see all those specific things. Sorry, we can't hear your audio coming through on the call, so we're going to have to rely on chat for SMEs in answering those things as well. But yeah, so it is an hour for Teams. So again, it's different for every service. So when you look in the Microsoft Docs, the Graph Docs, on the left-hand side, we have all our services which are based on the resource objects. And so whenever you look at an API path, you really want to make sure you understand what resource you're working with, and then our throttle limit pages and change notification limit pages. That's where you can then do that correlation to understand the life of the subscription.
And if you want to come to the booth later, if you want to talk more about your specific scenario, we can certainly talk through what your options are.
Okay. So have we had any questions from the chat yet, Jen?
Okay, so Brian in the chat asked a question. Darrel kind of responded, but let's go ahead and just ask it for the benefit of the room here. Does the introduction of Microsoft Fabric impact Microsoft Graph? Can Microsoft Graph access storage from the Fabric Lake?
Oh, good question. Yeah, so Microsoft Fabric obviously has been announced this morning. There's a bunch of blog posts around this. And Fabric, essentially, we've been working with that team to connect Microsoft 365 into it. So you can create what's called an Azure Synapse pipeline within Azure Fabric. And essentially what that will do is you can then connect to Microsoft 365 data using either the copy activity or the data flow activity. And in those two activities, you'll be able to pick the Microsoft 365 as a data source. And then what happens is in the activity properties, you'll see all the data sets. And those data sets are actually coming from Microsoft Graph Data Connect, which we've had as a product for about 4 or 5 years now. And essentially every 3 months now we're introducing brand new data sets in there. So right now there's a lot of the core resource objects that are in there, whether it's mail, calendar, contacts, there's the user and groups, there's Teams chats, channel chats. All those things can be piped into that Azure Synapse container, or actually an Azure Data Factory container as well, and then moved and used within that data lake, the one lake as we're calling it, from a Fabric perspective. And so that's kind of the general guidance we're giving there is that because you're moving so much data into that lake, you're better to use Microsoft Graph Data Connect, connecting through those two activities, the copy and the data flow activity, than using our REST APIs, which are really designed more for those interactive scenarios where you're calling to do things on your phone or on a website, rather than, say, trying to grab all of the calendar items for every single user within Microsoft 365. And so the Synapse or Data Factory is the way you'll find those, and those activities will just be straight on that designer when you're building those pipelines. It's a good question. Okay, from the room, where are we making Jeremy run to next? Who else had some questions? Okay, well, while people are thinking, Jen's got one up here, so we're going to make Jeremy run to the front of the room.
I like this one because I feel like this is a great foundational question, and it comes in the chat from Ray, and it says, how do I consume Microsoft Graph APIs without spending too much money if I'm an independent developer and want to learn more? In other words, are there any free Microsoft Graph APIs?
That's a good question. So from the concept of the way we define free, the Microsoft Graph APIs have always been readily available to be called as part of the licenses, the entitlement of you as a user. So the best way to get started as an independent developer is to go sign up for the developer program, which you can get to on developer.microsoft.com. And once you have that developer program, you actually get an M365 developer tenant. And that tenant gives you access to 25 developer licenses within that Microsoft 365 tenant. We will use them internally. That's how we play with all the technology we have, how we build Teams apps, how we build things with Fabric and with Lake. And those licenses entitle you to call the APIs. And so if you want to build an interactive app that grabs calendar items into your mobile app or into your Power Automate flow or into your backend service that you're building, you can do that entitlement in that way. Now, we announced guidance on a new blog post about 6 months ago now, which kind of defined that there are obviously some standard use kind of agreements we have in place for the way that you use those APIs. And so essentially, if you look on the throttling pages of the Microsoft Graph docs, we give you guidance on how often you can make those API calls before you start to get throttled. And that's really for our service on defending the costs of the service. We can't have thousands of apps making calls at 10 to 20,000 requests a second because we need to protect our service for the benefits of our users. And so those standard use agreements are there in place to do that. Now, in the last year and a half, we have introduced APIs that have meters on them. And so the best example of that is the Teams import-export APIs. Those Teams import-export APIs allow you to, at scale, at the top of the tenant tier, say whenever a message is created on any channel or any individual chat, let me know as a change notification. And because that service is extremely high from us from a cost of service to run that, we actually charge that for a particular scenario with meters. So if you've got an E5 license, you get a certain amount of those API calls as part of the entitlement of your E5 license. But if you want to go over that amount of calls governed by that ruling, then you can actually pay per call or pay per notification that comes through. And so it gives you the ability that even though if you want to go over our standard use, or you have a particular scenario where you need to make a lot of calls to the API, we're starting to provide those mechanisms for you to do this. And the Teams import-export APIs were built for a specific scenario around security and compliance with some of the bigger, larger partners that we work with large enterprise customers, where the scale that they wanted to call the API couldn't be met by standard use. And so we provided this offering for them to be able to meet their customers' requirements by having this offering that allows them to pay for the additional API calls required for them to have almost like real-time messages being pulled into their security and compliance system. There are other scenarios we're looking at for where we're going to introduce meters in similar scenarios where we realize that the standard use is not going to be enough for you to build the scenario you want, and we will provide that metered offering on top of the standard use environment you get as part of the license entitlement. So hopefully that helps answer that question. So I mean, the main call to action, go to the developer program, sign up for a developer tenant, and essentially then you can get going with the 25 licenses you have there. And for the most part, when you're building an app with 25 users, you're not going to really hit any of those standard use licenses. It's only when you move into production with a very large tenant where you're going to start to really hit that.
Thanks, Jeremy. The room here, yep, we have a question. That's awesome. And I'm also going to flip to our menu, just so you guys can see a flavor of what we've got.
Oh, well, good, because that's where I was heading. What's coming up?
That's a good question. So what is new on the Microsoft Graph? And so there are a bunch of sessions this week where Graph is not the lead in the way that we're talking or announcing it. And the main reason for that is we're focused on the user experiences that can be extended. And so you'll see a lot of Teams development sessions this week that under the covers are actually doing a lot with Microsoft Graph as part of those stories. There's a lot more of involvement in terms of the single sign-on that you can do within a Teams app. Because you're single sign into that Teams application, you can actually call Microsoft Graph under the covers to make your app even more rich with Microsoft 365 data. And if you've been following along for the last year, when you use the Teams Toolkit, which there is a session this week on, with single sign-on, now you can not only build Teams applications, but you can also build inside of Outlook with Outlook add-ins. You can build inside of the Microsoft 365 hub as well, and you can leverage all that Microsoft Graph calls within that in context of that single sign-on approach. And so that's probably the biggest news, that we're there as a story, but it's not the headline story from Microsoft Graph, because data is part of the solution you build in each of those product hubs that we have out there. Now, in addition to that, we did pull some other feature news in through the slides. So one thing that has been announced this morning, all of our blog posts came out this morning. So although the sessions may not have happened already, the blog posts are actually all in there on the developer.microsoft.com website. And what you'll see is that there is a new thing called the repository service, a syntax repository service. How many people in the room here or online, thumbs up maybe, are a SharePoint developer or have been a SharePoint developer in the past? Okay, a few. So I've been a SharePoint developer since about 2003, back in the day with ASP and running SQL servers. And one of the things we commonly did building line of business applications, or even when I worked at a product company, was leveraging a site collection as a container, as a repository. So if I wanted to store documents, maybe for a legal matter system that I was building or an invoice tracking system I was building, you would have to create a site collection within an existing SharePoint farm when it was on premises, or you would have to create a site collection inside of SharePoint Online. And now with repository, syntax repository services, you can actually create a container which essentially is a headless version of a SharePoint site collection that gives you all the goodness of a document library with all of the security and the versioning. And the biggest thing for me, quite honestly, is the fact that you can also, when you drop the documents in there, can leverage all of the collaboration user experiences, whether it's in Word, PowerPoint, Excel, or so forth, depending on the file type. And that container is separate, still running in the same customer tenant, but it's a separate container specifically for this use. And it can grow and scale a lot larger than what a standard site collection would be that you would go ask your tenant administrator for. And so the other benefit of this is it's still using the graph. So if you're familiar with the Files APIs and you want to use one of these repository services, you can still use the Microsoft Graph to access all those files, create files, edit files, do all the version history and so forth in there. There's some great content that's come out in that blog post with videos to explain that in a little bit more detail. But essentially think of it as a separate container that's allowing you to dedicate that to your line of business application or your SaaS application that has all the same benefits as a traditional site collection, but the scale is a lot stronger there. So definitely check out that blog post on syntax repository services.
And it's in private preview.
And thank you, Ben. Ben's at the front, keeping me in touch on the marketing side. It is in private preview. The blog post actually has a link. Where was it? Oh, so there we go. There's an aka.ms/syntax/build23, which has a link to sign up for that private preview. So if you're interested in that for your line of business application or your SaaS application, I'd highly recommend checking that out. And again, that's all driven by the Microsoft Graph because it's a headless service that we're offering. Yep, there's a question at the front here. Sorry, Jeremy. So the question was, I suspect you need a syntax license. The way that repository service is going with the private preview is it's going to be a metered service. So syntax as a suite has multiple products within it. And so this is one of the products as part of that syntax suite. In the blog post, there's a little bit of detail on where we're going with that, but there'll be more details in the future once it gets outside of that private preview. Yep, good question. Okay, were there any other questions from the audience here or from online?
We have a lot of things that...
Yeah, if you don't mind, thank you.
We've had a lot of items that have been listed in beta for a long time.
Yes.
Shall we just keep using it? How much longer will it move into 2.0, etc.?
Good question. So for those that have used the graph, we have a beta endpoint or beta endpoint, depending on where in the world you're from. And we have a V1 endpoint. And we often get the question of when is V 2.0 coming? The V1 is our production supported endpoint. And for those that are familiar, if you've used a beta endpoint and you've called it, and maybe you've had an issue with it and you've tried to raise a support ticket, it isn't production supported, so we can't support you on those beta APIs. There are cases, as you say, where things have been in beta for maybe more than a 6-month period or more than a 9-month period, and you're willing to take that risk on using the beta API, knowing that maybe before we gold plate it to V1, we might change the signature of the API, we might adjust the schema, we might change the behavior in the backend so it returns the objects in a different way. In general, if a beta API has been around for more than 3 months and we do intend to change it before we ship V1, we will actually notify you. So, and when I mean notify, sorry, we will publish on our blog posts what that change is and when we're planning to do that change. Typically, we'll give about a 3-month notice period if those changes are going to be coming to a beta endpoint, if we see enough usage on it that we know we could potentially impact people's applications that are coming through. Some of the APIs, and I use the profile API as an example, have been in beta for more than 18 months without moving to V1. And we understand that that profile API is in demand because it's calling things like skills and educations and hobbies, similar to what we were familiar with in SharePoint Server and on-premise as well. Those profile APIs, and actually Victor Willen, who's the PM for this, presented yesterday at another conference in Europe. We are rethinking what we're doing there at a product level. And so the APIs were not shipped to V1 because we're aligning the APIs to the product strategy. So we are delayed on shipping those things to V1. We haven't got any upcoming dates for those things, but typically what we'll do is, again, through blog posts, we'll keep people informed of when we intend to move to V1 with those things, or if we're going to change the signature in beta, we'll try and be as communicative as possible, either on a public blog post, or if we see specific tenants that are really heavily using an API, we actually will inform you through the message center. And so a big thing for me, I would encourage you all to do, which I know from history we see developers not doing as good a job on, is making sure you keep an eye on those message center blog posts that come through in the tenant admin screens, because they are in context of your tenants. And so in some cases, we'll send you a message center post specifically because we know you're heavily using a particular API, but we're either maybe, in the cases of legacy APIs, deprecating them, like things like the Outlook REST services, or if we're intending to change things as well. So the message center is a great way to keep up to date with tenant-specific things as well. But yeah, so it's on a case-by-case basis of how long they stay in beta. It depends on the product strategy. It depends on the product group. And we try and do our best to keep updated on blog posts of how those things are changing and when we intend to move them to V1. Okay, were we getting any questions from online, Jen?
Got one more. There's a couple questions here. I'm going to combine them, but it just has to do around Microsoft design. And this person, Jordan, specifically asks, I understand it with image generation, but I'm curious about building visual branding systems and how to increase this tool's Microsoft design capability to make creative process easier for designers.
Yeah, it's a good question. To unpack that a little bit, you have to explain the behavior of the Microsoft Graph or the strategy of the Microsoft Graph. The intent of the Microsoft Graph is to cover all APIs within Microsoft 365. And so that founded on, who's on the front here, started all this with kind of Azure AD and Outlook and Exchange and OneDrive and SharePoint. And it's evolved over time. When we first started the Graph, Microsoft Teams wasn't even a product. And when Teams decided to ship an API, they put that into the Microsoft Graph. And likewise, things like Planner and To-Do and other products like repository service with files are all moved into the Microsoft Graph as a REST API. There are products that are still very new that don't have APIs, like Microsoft Designer, that aren't on the Microsoft Graph. And we do a lot of work internally to make sure that if they're going to ship APIs, that they would come to us to do that as part of the family of Microsoft 365. There are examples of products that still have their own API endpoints, like the Yammer Viva Engage endpoint. But there is work we're doing right now with them, for instance, to have them on Microsoft Graph. And so every product has a different journey on when we expect to see their APIs on Microsoft Graph. But the intent within the organization is that if you have an API, that it will be coming to Microsoft Graph. Microsoft Graph Designer being a brand new product is not quite there yet. And so once they start looking at their extensibility story and their API story, that's when our teams get involved to try and encourage them to be part of that experience, because that way you get one set of documentation, one SDK, one authentication, authorization flow, and you're familiar with this as a developer once when you've called an API for one of our products with a new one. And that's kind of the way we think about it with the graph.
Got about 10, 15 minutes left. We've got the experts in the room. So are there any other questions in the room, in the chat?
Okay, sorry, down the end here. You're making Jeremy work today, that's good. I feel for him because it's, yeah, you got to ask the question next. We'll make him walk the other side.
My question would be, is there any plan to introduce any other project from Microsoft into Microsoft Graph, like Dynamics or Power Platform inside the Microsoft Graph?
Yeah, good question. So the question, just to repeat, was when we think about Microsoft Graph, is there any plan with Azure or Microsoft Dynamics to be part of the Microsoft Graph? It's an ongoing topic. It's a little bit of understanding how the Microsoft business is run with Azure as a division of the company and E&D as a division of the company that we are all in, and Dynamics being another one as well. Microsoft Graph has been around for a long time in parallel with the Dynamics APIs, which, a lot of that was evolution of historic products are either acquired or built, as well as Azure. And there continues to be a shared influence between how we design our APIs, and we actually have one of the architects in the room if you want to kind of grill him a little bit later. Gareth is going to be on the booth next door and has been heavily involved in the design of these APIs. But the intent is that although there are separate endpoints, that whenever we come up with design ideas and how we're going to govern those APIs and the shapes and so forth, that they all share that common knowledge. So they do get in the room and talk. They're not completely separated. At this point in time, though, they are separate endpoints. And there are a variety of different reasons for those to exist. One of them being that, traditionally with Azure, there is this notion of a data plane and a control plane in the way that you create objects and manage the objects as well as the underlying data within those objects, which M365 doesn't necessarily have that paradigm change there. And so that's one of the reasons that we diverged in terms of the strategy with having separate APIs. But there is a lot of work around the SDKs that we're doing right now and how we generate SDKs using Kyoto as an example, which is an open source tool that the Graph team actually built to help other teams use Kyoto to generate their SDKs. And so there's a lot of sharing going on between the three different major divisions of Microsoft in that way. But as it currently stands, that you would expect Dynamics to continue with their own API endpoints and Azure to continue with their own Azure API endpoints. And the Graph is focused, the scope is E plus D, which is everything underneath the Microsoft 365 product family umbrella. Yeah, that's a really good question. It comes up a lot. Yeah.
I'm looking at Stream, as that's now coming into SharePoint.
Yeah.
And the reason that works so well is because it's just a file, right?
Correct.
But video is more than just a file, and I feel like I'm losing out on some stuff that I've seen so far through Graph. Am I missing an SDK, part of the API, to take advantage of how it looks at the different types of video formats, how it buffers them, how it streams them, and so that I can regulate and control that when there's a failure?
Yeah, good question. And I'm going to let Jeremy take that because he is from the OneDrive and SharePoint team, and I know work closely with Mark on those things.
So the Stream team is definitely taking a look at how they enrich the Files API experience into a real video platform experience. In terms of formats, there is a formats API on the file. I'm not sure how much of what you're looking for in terms of like, how do I get which quality and whatnot is documented today. The stream team will certainly be welcome for any feedback. We can put you to the right communities online to provide that. But yeah, as you said, they're files, but they've also looked at, and I know they have more APIs coming over time that will enrich that for things like transcripts and other features of video. Those will start to show up on top of the Files API.
Okay, and I'm just looking through some of the IM questions to see if there's anything. Okay, so there was a question from Mario Contreras here. Apologies for the butchering on the name pronunciation. Around Yammer and Viva Engage. I did mention that as always, giving examples of product families that are currently not on the graph. We are actively working with that team. So you can expect to see something announced in probably a beta in the next 12 months. It's too hard to announce either side of that without seeing their plans. Revealing a little bit about how we work internally at Microsoft, we work in semesters, 6 months. And so we're just rolling on the end of a semester that ends at the end of June. And we're all busily writing our manifesto planning documents for what we will do in July and December. And so by that July, we'll know whether the product groups have committed to funding for the next semester on shipping these APIs, and then we'll be able to do a little bit more on the roadmap. We're actually working internally a lot on being better at disclosing those things. And so there is a Microsoft 365 roadmap, which I'm sure some of you may be familiar with. And we are actively working to try and make sure that we are ahead of the game a bit more in identifying what things are coming when. And so once we get those plans in place, we should be able to then commit to putting those things on the roadmap there. So keep an eye on that. There is a filter for Microsoft Graph there. And so you can see those things. It's an RSS feed, so you can subscribe to that in your friendly RSS reader or use a Power Automate flow like I do to notify me of things as they get added to that list. But that's the best way to keep in touch with where things are coming. And obviously these events, Jenn and Ben have written the blog post for all the news around the graph. That's probably the most informed way to know what's coming within the immediate 3-month period. But the Microsoft 365 roadmap is more of a what's coming to a 6 to 12-month period. So yeah, we'll know more in July, and just keep an eye on those things for that. Okay, any other questions in the room? Yep, yeah, keep going. And also, for those that aren't comfortable asking a question in an audience, that's really where the meetups space, sorry for those online that can't attend there, but the meetup space is going to be great. And we've got lots more people sitting at the front here that can answer questions as well in more detail. But yeah, I appreciate you asking the questions live in this session. Thank you.
Okay, so I will try to formulate my question right. It's a little bit, it concerns the Graph API, sure, but it's more like on the subject that we are all here today about Copilots and M365 is coming out. And my question is, is there anything that will be connected so I can use, let's say, a Copilot to help me search files in SharePoint or whatever? Like it's going to be using the Graph API to search. Let's say, like we've seen in demos today earlier, like, is there anything about the graph itself?
Yeah. Do you want to take that, Ben, as you're most informed? Sorry, Jeremy. Yeah. Or sorry. Sorry.
So your question is about how Microsoft Graph and Microsoft 365 Copilot integrate together, and what are the opportunities for you as a developer to engage on that?
Yeah, basically, like when we talk about organization data, most clients that we have, their data sits on SharePoint, it's on OneDrive, it's where their data are. It's not in any data lake or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So Microsoft 365 Copilot is grounded on Microsoft Graph, and all of the data that is on the customer's tenant, whether it is SharePoint documents, Outlook emails, Team Chat conversations, tasks and planner, all of the different suite of products that are part of Microsoft 365 that then compose the fabric of data of Microsoft Graph is what is grounding Microsoft 365 Copilot. So every time that you interact with Microsoft 365 Copilot, whether it is in Word, in Excel, in Teams, in Bing, when it's connected to your enterprise account, it is using data from Microsoft Graph. Now, it is using, similar to the architecture that you saw this morning on the keynotes, where Copilot, what the Copilots use a set of data to ground all of the prompts. Well, it's making search queries to the Microsoft Graph and to something that we call the semantic index, which is built on top of Microsoft 365 data. It's a vector index built on Microsoft 365 data that it's powering all of the grounding capabilities of Copilot on Microsoft 365 information. There's a couple of opportunities that you as a developer have in order to augment those capabilities. The first one is indexing and augmenting the Microsoft Graph data state with additional information, whether it is by storing more files in SharePoint or by using Microsoft Graph connectors to bring in external data into Microsoft Graph. So that way, that external data, imagine you have a line of business database, or you have something, that you can bring in data from external sources, and that will then make part of our search index or of our semantic index, and Copilot will be able to reason over that data. That's the first one. The second one is through plugins. And as it was announced this morning, when you build a plugin, it works with Microsoft 365 as well. And in addition to Microsoft 365 operating with open standard OpenAI plugins, it also all of the applications that you have created so far that uses message extensions work with both Teams and Outlook now will function as plugins as well, without any additional work from you as a developer to do. So those are like the ways in which Copilot in Microsoft 365 reasons on top of Microsoft 365 data, how you can augment that data state, and then how you can integrate in the Copilot UX. Is
there a particular breakout session covering that?
Tomorrow in the keynote.
Yeah, so Yina is actually my manager and is one of the founders of the Microsoft Graph, and he's in the keynote tomorrow morning with Rodgers Shah. So there'll be a whole demonstration of what Yina just said. So thank you for answering that as well. I appreciate that.
I think there's also a lab on it, and there's a breakout session on building Copilot experiences that is right after the keynote tomorrow. I think it's at 11.
Okay, so Ben, 11 o'clock after the keynote, there is a Copilot lab that they're going to be presenting as well. So the build session builder, essentially, if your Copilot is going to be too big a broad term to same as like AI would be in a session search. So anything around collab apps as a category is going to narrow your sessions down to what is in context of Microsoft 365 development, which is the tip there.
It's actually 10:15.
10:15.
To 11:45. That must be starting at 11:10.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. Okay. Well, we are nearly at time. So firstly, thank you for everyone in the room for attending this, and thank you for all the questions. Thank you for everyone up in the sky, Microsoft Teams, for asking your questions as well. For those that are in person, the meetup section is next door. The shifts are essentially all day for the next 2 days. There are about 9 different booths in there. Microsoft Graph, Microsoft Teams, Office add-ins, there's Syntex in there, there's Viva in there. It's all focused around development. And we have a lot of people that are from Redmond, HQ, and beyond, that are subject matter experts. Either they're the engineers or they're the product managers that are building these things, where you can come and ask those questions. So for me, these events are all about meeting people in person and having those discussions. I'm definitely more of a subscriber to watching the breakout sessions on demand to make the most of the people engagement. So I'd encourage you to try and make sure you carve time outside of the sessions you're attending to come talk to us, because we'd love to hear what you're doing with the products and how we can help you make your experiences better. Thank you, Jeremy, for running around with the mic. Thank you, Jen, for managing the online stuff, and enjoy the rest of the build.